Recently, the Cabinet approved reforms to Rwanda's education system. Now, in today's conversation, we're going to look at the main challenges affecting Rwanda's education system, as well as how these reforms intend to bring in solutions. I am your host, Tessie Cavan, and I am privileged to host the Minister of Education, Honorable Joseph Nsengimana. Minister Joseph, it's an honor to have you on set today. And before we start our conversation, it's been roughly 9 months, right, since you came into office. Tell me how it has been for you in terms of adjustment, moving from, say, the private sector now to the public sector. How has that been for you?
You're right, it's been 9 months. It's been quite a busy 9 months. I think the public sector in Rwanda is a bit different than your typical public sector. Ordinarily, public sector means slower than the private sector. But it's been my experience that the public sector in Rwanda moves at a relatively high speed. So it's actually very refreshing to see. That said, it's been rather busy the last 9 months. Busy learning, busy adjusting, busy understanding what the challenges are within the education system, and busy working with the colleagues within the education sector to try to address those challenges.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the word challenges, so then let's dive into that. I know recently the Cabinet approved some changes, if you may, into the education system. What are some of the main challenges that they want to address?
So when you look at the results of what we're seeing in the education system, you will see, for instance, a rather high repetition rate in the lower primary. So we saw, for example, 35% in P1, primary one, and then it gets a bit better in second year and third year, but nevertheless, it's still high. And so we sought to understand why is that? Why is that the case? Because it's not intuitive, right? To understand why would the kids be repeating there. And then when we dug a little bit deeper, we realized that if you look at the lower primary, we have both the single shift and the double shift systems working. It means that for the double shift, for those who don't know what that is that a set of students go to school in the morning and another set of students go to school in the afternoon. And that's usually because we have limited infrastructure compared to the number of students we have. Despite the effort that the government has done, we still have about 52% of the lower primary that's still practicing double shift. However, when you look at the curriculum, it was intended for single shift, meaning you actually had about 8 periods per day, which is about 40 periods per week. However, those in double shift could not do that. So what we saw was that a lot of teachers will struggle to complete the curriculum within the allocated time. And what we saw, that was one side effect cause of this. The other effect we saw was that some schools basically try to eliminate the double shift by increasing the size of the classroom. So for example, if you had one class that was 50 students that was studying in the morning and 50 students were studying in the afternoon, the school will combine those classes and now you have one class with 100 kids.
Wow.
As an example, right? Yeah. And so that puts a lot of burden on the teacher to try to really educate that big of a class. And so these are some of the things we noticed. And so that was one challenge. How do we address that? And some of the reform that you saw that was approved by Cabinet, we discussed it 2 weeks ago in the conversation that we had around primary school, was to align the curriculum with the available instruction time. Okay. And so now what you're going to see is that in the lower primary, we would have a 5-period day. And that adds up to about 25 periods per week. However, both the single and double shift classes would be able to complete the lessons. And this is actually aligned with the international standards. A lot of countries practice that. They actually have 20 to 25 periods per week. And so it's aligned around that. And to be able to accomplish that, we said, what is it we want our kids to have mastered when they leave P3? And then we work backwards to that. And so what is it you want to make sure that the kids know by the time they graduate in the lower primary? There is literacy. Yeah. They have to be able to read and understand English. They have to be able to read and understand Kinyarwanda. They have to be able to do arithmetic or mathematics at their level. They have to have a working understanding of what science is and ICT, because those are some of the things that they have to contend with. By and large, those are the main things that you really have to have competency in by the time you graduate in P3. So you teach the kids to read so that they can read to learn afterwards.
Okay. Let's go to what I'd call the foundation learning. I want you to tell me why this is so crucial, because I find that many countries don't even invest in foundational learning. Many of them don't see the immediate benefits, if you may. So they don't quite put effort in it, but they put it in secondary. So in Rwanda, what are the efforts that are going into foundational learning?
Oh, that's a good point. I think if we just borrow from the word itself, foundation, and we use an analogy of building a house. Okay. So when you go to build a house, when you lay down the foundation, you want that foundation to be strong. Yeah. Because if that foundation is weak, even if you put on top a really solid house, it's going to crumble. Yeah. So it's imperative that you build a strong foundation around that. So in education, it's the same. If you look at the foundation years, and I think when you talk about foundation years, you might have been referencing the preschool. But foundational years is both the preschool and the lower primary, so all the way to P3. And if we get our kids to really develop that foundation, that strong foundation in those years, it pays off throughout their learning career. So it's imperative. That's why, for instance, here in Rwanda, we have made it a goal that during the NST2, we are going to increase the enrollment in preschool all the way to 65%. And at least 65%. Yeah. We would love to get more because of the benefit that we have seen it yield in the students that have done that. And we also want to strengthen the lower primary so that when the kids graduate, completes the lower primary, they're really set for success for the rest of their student career. And so for countries that aren't investing in the foundational years, I really would encourage them to do that. And it's one way of tackling the learning poverty. And actually here during the Flex 2024, the countries agreed that we're going to tackle and eliminate learning poverty in Africa by the year 2035. And this has been adopted at the African Union level as well. And so I think it's an opportunity for all of us at the continental level to put significant investment in this segment of education and set our kids up for success.
You mentioned raising this enrollment number to 65%. One, what is the current percentage? And two, how do you plan to do that? I saw somebody ask, will you force the kids to go to school?
We are at 45%. But it hasn't been always 45%. It's increased over the years because of what the government's effort that the government has deployed in this space. So how are we going to accomplish this? There's a number of ways, right? One is that we are encouraging the parents, because this really starts with the parents. They need to understand the benefit of it. Yeah. And then that they choose to bring the kids to these schools. That's one. The second part is we need to provide those schools. Yeah. Because once you convince the parents, you also have to provide where to take the kids. And so the government has done quite a lot of work in this space. For instance, we developed curriculum for the preschools. And once we formalize the preschool, the government will give you teachers, like teachers that are paid by the government, to be able to, again, expand, increase access to preschool. So there's a lot of effort and a lot of investment that the government is making to ensure that that happens. However, we would actually like to see that this effort goes even early years. We are talking about 3 to 5 with an emphasis on 5 because that's the preschool, like the year before you start school. But even we've seen a benefit even in the early years, 2, 3, 4. And so we work with NCDA to ensure that we are working together on that segment. By doing also school feeding programs in the preschool as well. That also helps because it also ensures that there is a nutrition made available to young people, and that the health at that age is important because not only it addresses the growth, but also the development of the young people at that age is important. Yeah. It does affect their ability to learn and develop. So it's important to invest in there. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of effort we are making to be able to reach at least 65% in this space.
Okay. So going back to these reforms, how do you know that these reforms will actually give us the outcomes that we are looking for? Is there a way of measuring the outcomes?
Yes. So we have some assessment that we do, and we actually do them like every 2 years. NESA conduct these assessments, but we also do have some international assessment that we can measure this. However, even in the classroom, the teacher should be able to assess how the students are performing. And really, when we think about the education system, we need to reimagine almost everything. So when we talk about assessment, what does that mean, right? Notice I use the word assessment, I didn't say test. Yeah. Right? Yes. That's intentional. Because when you do an assessment, you are assessing whether or not what the child has been taught actually stuck or the child learned what they were being taught. And it's both a measure for the student, but it's also a measure for the teacher. Because it tells the teacher that what they designed worked or didn't work. And then it gives them an opportunity to go back and say, you know what, I realize that the majority of my students are experiencing a problem in this space. Let me go revisit that, right? Let me redo it again. It's all about learning. It's not about testing. It's not about failing people, but it's about educating and enabling the young people to learn. And so we accompany the young people on this journey along that. So the teachers will do this formative assessment that goes every day. They can do an assessment and see what was discussed today, how did it work? What was discussed this past week, how did it work? And so on and so forth. So you don't have to wait until the end of the year to be able to know whether students were learning or not. Yeah. And so a combination of formative and summative assessment that the teachers conduct over the year, and then these national exam as well as the international exam will actually give us a sense of how we're progressing. And so we will be actually sharing these results. Every year we will share the result. This is what we've seen. This is how we're progressing. Because I think transparency is important. Parents deserve to know how their kids are doing. The country deserves to know how the kids are doing. Yeah. So we want to do the assessment and then put it out there and have a conversation around that. Yeah.
Teachers, as you mentioned, they're very important actors in the education system. One, were they consulted as you were doing the reforms? Were they part of those conversations? And two, how are they being enabled, if you may, to then effect some of these reforms in the schools?
Yeah, so really I can't overemphasize the importance of a teacher. Teachers are very important. And we did consult with teachers. actually throughout this, because it coincided with a review of the competence-based curriculum. So over 5,500 people were consulted as we were trying to identify the challenge and also design the solution for it. And so among those people were teachers, but there were also parents, there were also students. And so we tried to really talk to all the stakeholders and engage them to identify the problem, the challenges. The issue of the misalignment between the curriculum and the instruction time was first raised by teachers. And so they are part of this, of this whole, analysis and formulation of solutions. Now, what we do is to try to find how do we support the teachers to fulfill their mandate of actually teaching our children. And so we work with partners, primarily through REB, the Rwanda Basic Education Board, in providing a professional development for our teachers, which is more general, right? Learning about leadership, learning about the subject matter itself, learning about pedagogy. But also, we are working on a couple programs, particularly, as you know, English is our language of instruction. Yeah. And so we want to make sure that our teachers are strong, they have strong competency in English. And so we are designing a program which is going to help the teachers increasing their competency in this language, English. And that's going to be very important because if they're teaching in a language, they must be fluent in that language. Otherwise, what they're teaching is lost in translation. Mm-hmm. And so those are the set of intervention that we're doing to ensure that the teachers are provided the benefit or the ability to execute on their mandate. This is important for them as well because the new teacher statute stipulates that teachers must be at a certain level of English competency, and they'll be measured. And so it is important that within the 2-3 years, they reach that level as it's indicated in the statute. So going forward, those who are joining the teaching career would be assessed and make sure that they meet the requirement. Those who are already in service, we are then working to raise their level as well.
As we talk about actors, parents are the other actors. And I realize that the realities in Kigali are different from the realities in many upcountry areas. Maybe as you have gone to some of these areas, what are the parents saying? Are they on board with these reforms?
The parents actually have been very supportive of these reforms. We've seen really positive feedback all across. Parents were very supportive of these reforms. However, we also keep engaging the parents because none of this is going to work if the parents aren't really active in the learning of their children. And so when, as a parent, you send your child to school, you need to know when they go, you need to know when they come back, you need to know what they're doing at school. And you, as a parent, need to hold the teacher, the school, the ministry accountable. And that really is important, is key. And so when a child goes to school, you need to ask them, what should I expect? What should I expect to see over the year? At the end of the year, what should I expect to see? And you need to hold us accountable by saying, the year has gone by or 2 years have gone by, and I'm not seeing the changes you promised to see, for me to see. Or you go to the teacher and say, why is my child doing this? I think that kind of engagement is one of the main ingredients of increasing the learning outcome. So it is important, it's imperative that parents be engaged and be active. Now, I know there is a lot of demand on the parents. There's quite a lot of demand. You have structure now, both parents work, and there's a lot of demand on them. But this is part of how can we facilitate this? It's maybe have teacher-parents engagement on a regular basis. We can use technology. You can text your teacher, the teacher of your child. You can call, you can email, but stay engaged. Do not disconnect, because that's not going to be helpful for your child.
I hear you. Moving to the secondary school now, and there's been a lot around the subject combinations. What is wrong with the current subject combination, and how will that be resolved?
So, I smile because we need to look at what are we trying to accomplish, right? If you look at the students who are graduating from secondary education, let me first say that within our secondary education in Rwanda, we have really 3 branches, if I can call it that. We have the general education, we have professional education, and then we have TVET or TSS. And so if you look at the TVET, we have specific areas that it focuses on: construction, tourism and hospitality, manufacturing, and so on and so forth. These provide our young people an opportunity to get hands-on, industry, work-ready kind of skills. And they're able to move directly from the school into work and perform, right? And also still create some flexibility for them should they choose to continue their studies in either Rwanda Polytechnics or any other university they choose to do their studies in. For professional education, we have accounting, and then we have School of Nurses. So they have nurses that are being formed at the A2 level in this space. And so they can directly go to the field as well. And then we have the general education, which had this combination you were talking about. We had 10 combinations. 10. And these are 3 course-based combination. And because of that, you tend to have over-specialized children when they graduate. Over-specialized and yet not enough knowledge in those particular fields.
A jack of all trades?
Pretty much, right? A master of none.
Yeah.
And then what you find out is, like, in some of these combinations, literally there are things they don't study. They don't study mathematics, for example. And you stop, your last course of mathematics is in the O level. And that's just not the kind of reality you're going to face around that. So we wanted to make sure that, first of all, we provide our kids an opportunity, a way to expand their horizon, a way that is consistent with the curriculum-based philosophy. That's the curriculum we're using in Rwanda. And it does recommend learning pathways, rather than combination. And these learning pathways are broad areas of studies. So we landed on 3 learning pathways: mathematics and sciences, arts and humanities, and languages. And in addition to those 3, there are courses that no matter what you take, you still are going to take. Mathematics, you're going to do math even if you do languages. Right? Of course, the math that you do in languages is not the same math as you do in the mathematics and sciences. It's different levels. But nevertheless, you're going to do mathematics. You're going to do ICT, no matter what you take. You are going to do entrepreneurship, right? You're going to do sport. Of course, you're going to do some general studies. There were some general studies you can pretty much cover any of the areas you didn't cover. And you're going to do English, the language, English as a language. And so this gives students a well-balanced, round-up education, one that allows them to be able to continue studying at the university, if that's the route they're taking. But even if they branch off and start work, they have enough knowledge to actually produce and not find someone who can't even express a thought around that. So it was that's what was driving these reforms around that. And we consulted with universities, for instance, and they're very excited, and actually were really positive about these changes because they were all complaining of the fact that the students they were getting were not ready. And they had to really struggle to bring them up to speed in order to continue with the university study level. So I think this is what he addresses. And the second thing he addresses is that the combination, we're locking you in a path to do one thing.
Yeah.
And imagine you are 14 years old, maybe 14, 15 years old, and you're making a decision that you can't get out of, for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
It's now, I don't think it's the right time to do that. But with these pathways, you have so many things you can choose from when you go to university. And so this broadens the horizon for the students.
So then, do we have career guidance counselors in schools? Because, as you said, it's an array of choices to choose from. How do the students know what path do I take?
So that's really one of the things we're trying to find out how to implement, right?
Okay.
Provide this guidance around that. We're actually starting this summer.
Okay.
During this summer, what we're going to do is that we're going to do a summer program that addresses the all-level students so that they can understand what are these pathways, right? And why should I choose one versus the other? What really drives the decision? And what's the implication of that? So we want the young people and their parents to understand that so that when they choose, they're guided by this understanding. At the same time, for the A-level students, we now want for them to understand what are the options, when they complete school, what do you do to choose a major at the university, for example? What should be the consideration? What should go into this decision? And so this is one way to start engaging them early on, so that they start to understand what the options are, right? Because sometimes now knowing narrows your options, right? Around that. So you need to sort of understand what's available there. I've had an experiment that I conducted when I was in my previous life. I had a group of students which were in secondary education, and I invited them, and I took them to the place I worked at the time, and we had engineers, lawyers, different levels, right? I just placed them with someone, and they did a day where they spent with that person. They went to every meeting they went to. They did shadowing, and then at the end we had a conversation around that, and 3 young ladies in that class ended up deciding what to study at the university based on that one day.
Wow.
And like 2 of them are actually engineers. They took that decision because of what they saw that day. They ended up becoming engineers.
Wow.
And one became a computer scientist around that. So the power of exposure cannot be underestimated. So we need to figure out how do we create that exposure for our children. This summer program is just a start.
Okay.
Let this be exposed to all this stuff. And we will be working with the REB. They have a studio where we can then create these products that we can make available to students that in essence talk about all different professions that they can go to. We can invite professionals to sit within this studio, and we can record this and then make it available to their young people so that they are informed. Not just for the young people, the parents who help them as well.
Yeah.
And so that they can make informed decision. That's really the effort that I think we're looking at doing.
That is mind-blowing because, as you said, if the exposure is there, then this student knows what the reality is on the ground and the expectations. So it brings me to the next question. How are you roping in the private sector, where this student will probably graduate and end up you know, and the private sector kind of says there's a bit of a gap. They're giving us people, but these people are not ready for what we are doing. How are you linking this two?
You know, the conversation with the private sector is an interesting one. As you indicated, a lot of time you hear the private sector would say, oh, the students that we're getting are not, they don't have the skills we're looking for, or they don't have the experience we're looking for. But on the other hand, when you approach them to say, well, can you make internship available for the students?
Yes.
So they have an opportunity to be exposed to work before they graduate, then you struggle to get a yes around that. The other thing is like when you have to engage the private sector and say, well, come participate in the design of the courses. And here I think we're talking mainly on the higher education around that. But even on the basic education, we need to engage the private sector. The videos that I was referring to is to bring people, the private sector people, to talk about what they're doing. Okay. And then be able to, for the kids to start formulating what are the skills needed and so on and so forth around that. So it is an ongoing engagement with the private sector, but it's one that's really important, particularly when we start talking about higher education. The private sector needs to be at the table as we are crafting the curriculum, or are we deciding what courses to teach. That's one. Secondly, I really urge the private sector to provide internship. Internship has a lot of benefits. One is that you are contributing to the education of these young people. Second, it's a 3 months or 4 months long interview. You see the student, you see what they're capable of, you see how fast they can learn, and that's your future employee, right? You get to actually see the product before you buy, in essence. Yeah. And so it is an opportunity for them as well. So I really hope that this conversation continues and expands so that every private sector company can say, I want to participate, I want to offer internship to the students that are studying something close to what we do around that. And also to engage the university and give them feedback. How did they do? Yeah. What are the gaps that you observe? So that these universities or higher learning institutions can try to plug the gap. And so you will see in the coming years a closer collaboration between the industry and the higher education, spearheaded by the Higher Education Council.
Wow, that's exciting to hear. I'm almost at the tail end of this conversation, but we can go on and on. But there is a clear disparity, if you may, between the private schools and the public schools. And these students from both worlds will meet at the marketplace. How do we plan to level the playing field, if you may?
So, I mean, it's an interesting observation, and this is it's a disparity that exists everywhere in the world. The private schools tend to have more access on certain things, technology, for instance, or equipment, than the public school. And so that's just the reality around that. What we need to do is make sure that those who are going through the public school system are well equipped, rather than comparing ourselves to the private sector, because it will be a wrong comparison. The reality is the government mandate is to provide services to all citizens, regardless of where they are paying or not paying. In case of basic education, you know that the schools in Rwanda, you do not pay tuition. There are fees that you pay, contribution that you pay, but they are not tuition. The government covers the tuition. If you go to a private school, the students are paying tuition, and they're paying quite a lot around that. So what they provide in the private school is never going to equate what you provide in the public school. But that does not mean that those in the public school can't learn. They can and they should, right? So we want to focus on the public and government-aided school and deliver services to them to ensure that they are capable, they're able, and they are prepared to face the world regardless of who their competitor is. Whether it be some kid that came from a public school, a private school in Rwanda, or even an international student. Because as you know, the world is getting flatter and flatter, right? Yeah. So we need to not only compare ourselves to the private school in Rwanda, we need to compare ourselves to the world. And so how do we focus on what we can deliver and make sure that the students from our system come out prepared, not just to survive, but to thrive in the reality, in the world that we send them to.
And that's expensive. Talk about the funding aspect.
It is. If you look at the government investment in education is quite large. It's quite large. But it's an investment, it's a worthwhile investment. If you look at the Vision 2050 in Rwanda, where we want Rwanda to be a middle to high income country, and that it's based or built on knowledge-based economy. Without education, without educating our young people, we will not be able to achieve that. And so it's a worthwhile investment. It's an investment, it's like the water that lifts all boats. Because if you're thinking about building roads, you need people who can build the road. If you're thinking about health, doctors, nurses, you need people who can do that. The 4x4 program, for instance. But what does that mean? It means we have to build and increase the capacity within the education system to provide those people around that. So it is, to me, it's a no-brainer that we have to invest in education. We should invest even more, but we have to also make sure that in the country, right, the country has to survive, has to live, have to basically handle all sectors. But if you look at the investment that Rwanda is making in education, is really it's commendable. Between 2017 and 2024, 27,500 classrooms were built. That is unprecedented. And actually, I was speaking to our colleagues from the World Bank, and they wanted to write a story around that because they think that other countries should emulate that. But that was our partnership with them, but it's also the government investment in that effort. That's because the government has understood that this is an area where we need to invest in. And the government has done incredible job in investing this, actually for the last 30 years. Because one of the things that actually goes unnoticed is the fact that all the students, all the kids in Rwanda right now can access education. They can go to primary school, they can go to secondary school. All of them. All of them. This is not the case in most countries, right? It's not the case. And if you compare that to before 94, going to school was not a right, was a privilege. A lot of people didn't go to school. And so I think really the government should be commended for the work that has been done over the last 30 years to ensure that all Rwandans have access to school. You might not get the school you choose or you want, but you can go to school. So it's a huge achievement. Now we have to build on those accomplishments and say, how do we now increase quality? How do we make sure that we're increasing quality? How making sure that we are equipping young people to come out of school, with the skills and the knowledge necessary for them to get Rwanda to the Vision 2050 and themselves. It's not just about the country, it's also about themselves.
Finally, Minister, when are we rolling out these reforms, and are there any challenges that you foresee, any teething problems that you foresee as you roll it out?
So, every change has its own challenges, right? The rollout right now, we looked at for the primary, for example, there will be no problem. That will roll out straight in September. We are currently looking at the rollout of our learning pathways, which we also plan to do in September. So we're still doing assessment and ensuring that the rollout is done smoothly, that there are no challenges, especially for the students. So it will be a phased out approach. So we introduce it to S4, and then S5 next year, and then S6 the year after that. And so this is still in planning, but the plan is to really roll out the changes in September, starting September, around that. Because every delayed time, it's impacting a cohort of students. So we don't want to delay the changes because we don't want any kids to be suffering from something we've determined is not necessarily the right thing to be doing. And so we will do that. We'll do the phase-out approach for the secondary education. For the primary, the lower primary is an instant introduction of the reforms.
Probably look into that camera and give us your parting shot. There are parents listening to you, there are children, there are teachers. There's a whole host of people. What would you tell them?
You know, when I was asked to serve as the Minister of Education, the President made it clear that the responsibility of education was not a responsibility of the Ministry of Education alone. It is a responsibility for everyone, for every Rwandan, for parents, for teachers, for head teachers, for local government, and for the student. So it is a combined effort that we must work together to be able to achieve. And so I really extend an invitation to everybody and say, we are here to serve you. How can we do this together? Let's engage each other. Let's all work together and make school a base or an engine for transformation, not only for our children's life, but that of our country and that of our continent. Thank you.
Honorable Minister, I am grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.